Hello, Fiona. Welcome to this Friday's Table Talk. And we're going to be looking at the next section of Mark, which is Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. So Mark 5. And as we start, do you want to read that for us?
Yeah, shall I read? Mark 5, verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered round him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed round him, and a woman was there who'd been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She'd suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned round in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," the disciples asked, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking round to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he'd put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in to where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat.
Great, thank you. So just for context then, Jesus has just healed a demon-possessed man. We had on Sunday the calm and the storm. So that's on his way to the demon-possessed man. He did that, and he's left straight away again, and he's arrived here. And that story does in some ways link up, and you can read about that story. We're putting that story out in a blog post. But we're just going to focus on these two, aren't we, in particular? Why are we focusing on these two together?
I think it really strikes me just the comparing the two, the woman and the girl, and just the kind of personal encounter that they have with Jesus. One minute he's calming the storm, this extraordinary power, and then the next minute he's up close and personal with a woman and a little girl. It's just interesting to contrast them. I think we know already, don't we, that Mark moves through his gospel stories very quickly. There's a lot of at-onces and immediatelys. And he puts together his gospel very carefully. He constructs it very carefully. And this is what it sounds really odd, doesn't it? But this is called a Markan sandwich. So it's not cheese and pickle, but it's Mark has kind of deliberately sandwiched these stories together in order to help us to contrast them. You can also read the same miracle healings. Where did you say it was, Josh?
Matthew 8.
Matthew 8.
Yeah.
And it's interesting if you want to look at Matthew 8 and just see how it's the same stories, the same things happen, but we've got a lot more detail in Mark. It's like Mark kind of focuses in on these two particular things, which is interesting because he moves very quickly. So he's clearly focusing in on the details for a reason.
And that's true because we do read of Jesus just healing a number of people, move on.
Yes, exactly.
Not these two. So
exactly.
So
I just love the way that in what was very much a man's world, that Mark focuses right in on these two women, and particularly the sort of the contrasts and the similarities between them. So just full disclosure, I had a really good talk on this by a minister called Steve Midgley in 2015 on a Biblical Counselling UK conference. So basically everything I'm saying is straight
there a way
from Steve.
to find that?
I guess Biblical Counselling UK 2015.
We could try and put a link maybe in the YouTube.
Steve Midgley. Yeah, I can't remember what the talk was called. It might have been something about shame, I think might have been
Okay.
But basically everything I'm saying is his stuff. It's not my stuff. But it just really struck me, stayed with me. What's that, 6 years ago? I still remember it. So
Great.
that's a significant talk.
And what would somebody be looking for to know that these two stories are linked? How do we know that?
I just think some of the similarities are quite. So, would you like to be the beautiful assistant?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, and write some of the things up. Not in any particular order.
I've already prepared it.
Oh wow! I hadn't seen you do that. That's lovely. Okay, so I don't. Could you write? Oh, you've got the same colours. I was just thinking there are similarities and there are
colours.
differences. So maybe if you could sort of do the similarities and the differences.
Yes.
So the similarities is they're both women. They're both female, probably is a better way of saying it. A difference would be that Jairus' daughter would have been she would have had sort of standing, and she would have been she came from a wealthy family. Whereas the woman is an outcast. So you can imagine the woman kind of creeping around with a sort of shawl over her face. Interesting, they're both unclean. So the little girl, because she's dead, is unclean, and the bleeding woman is unclean. So that's an interesting...
Can you just say, just for people, what would that mean in their context for it to be unclean?
The woman, I mean, we can talk about this a bit later, but what fascinates me about this is the shame. Everybody would have known that she was unclean, that you would become unclean religiously unclean by touching her. So she shouldn't have been in a crowd. That's why she was creeping around and wanting to be unnoticed. People would have known about her because it was a small population. Just terrible life. I mean, she would have been disgraced and rejected and alienated would be some of the words because of the bleeding that she was experiencing. You can look back in Leviticus to see why that was. Interesting again, I don't know if it's particularly relevant, but the woman had been suffering for 12 years. The little girl was 12 years old.
And that's one of the things that if you're looking for, actually, why has he made this detail?
Yes.
The little girl, she was 12 in brackets.
Yes.
You kind of go, why has he added
Yes,
that? And you go,
exactly.
Well, actually, maybe these are linked. Maybe these two stories are supposed to go together.
I think they are supposed to go together. And I think the shock for the horror for the woman, 12 years, I mean, that's a long time to be suffering and be an outcast and be rejected and living outside of the society. She's penniless. Presumably, Jairus' daughter would have had, but her family would have had money. So this woman she's got nothing. And Jairus' daughter would have been much loved. And I mean, clearly he's desperate for her to be healed. So I guess you could say, loved and secure and sort of isolated and alienated and poor. That would be a big difference between them. They're both healed by a touch from Jesus, so that's a similarity. That's interesting, isn't it?
And we've mentioned that before,
Yeah.
the touch, haven't we? Because
Yeah.
it's not necessary.
No, absolutely. Oh, you've done that nicely. Done it much better than I would have done it. Those are and both are restored. So both are healed, restored. That would be another big similarity. They're both
I'll add that now. One of the other
Yeah.
nice similarities, I guess, when we see the healing is what Jesus calls the bleeding woman. They're both daughters,
Yes.
aren't they?
I hadn't noticed that. That's lovely. Yeah, they are. Yeah. Another difference would be, which I think is, again, I don't fully understand, but it's really striking that the woman who wants to hide and slip away unnoticed, Jesus
Yeah.
publicly,
Yeah.
he kind of outs her, or, it's kind of public, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the little girl, he keeps the crowds away.
Yeah, he particularly says to send them all away, doesn't he?
So one really, a really helpful thing when we're looking at the Bible is to look at the surprises, isn't it? And a big surprise to me in this story is, why does this poor woman with a kind of shawl over her face, full of shame and wanting to hide, she knows she shouldn't be there. She's just kind of reaching out to Jesus, and yet he focuses everyone's attention on her. I mean, I'd have been just
It's
like,
awful, isn't it?
You'd be dying, wouldn't you? It
Yeah.
would just be horrible. And yet with a little girl, he keeps the crowds away. Both situations, interesting again, Jesus is mocked. So the disciples say, what do you mean, who's touched you? There's loads of people, they're all pushing around. I mean, how could you possibly say that? And then the people mock Jesus when he goes into the little girl. Similarities, again, it's not the little girl doing this, obviously, because she's dead, but Jairus falls at Jesus' feet and the woman falls at Jesus' feet. So there's a kind of humility, desperation. They're both absolutely desperate situations. And then another interesting thing is if both of these situations, if you were to kind of triage them, as in a sort of A&E, if they sort of both turned up at A&E at the same time,
Yes.
I mean, there would be no question as
No.
to where you would go first.
Absolutely.
This woman's been suffering for 12 years. It's a kind of chronic illness, and it's an emergency with this little girl dying. I mean, it doesn't get more of an emergency than that, really, does it? A child
Yeah.
dying is just absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, I read this with a doctor, and he said it's madness.
Absolutely crazy.
Why is he stopping?
Yeah.
To treat this lady
Yeah.
who's already at the end of her life?
Yeah.
And you've got this young
Absolutely.
girl who needs desperate care.
Yeah, so again, that's a huge surprise. Why would Jesus do that? Why would he not go and heal the little girl with desperate Jairus and then take the woman, say, meet me somewhere quiet and I'll heal you sort of a bit later. It's a really strange situation, which is interesting.
And you can't help but feel for the dad
Yes.
and his emotions.
I mean, it must have been intolerable for him. I mean,
Yeah.
I would imagine taking a sick child down to casualty is a pretty stressful situation, even if they're nowhere near as sick as this little girl. So the desperation, he must have been, I don't know, beside himself with what's Jesus doing, stopping talking to this woman? Can't he see what's going on? So yeah, they're both desperate, but desperate in different ways. And it's just very interesting what Jesus does. So I think those were the sort of things that kind of struck me about the differences and the similarities, which is quite a helpful thing to do. I think one of the critical moments in the story is verse 30, when Jesus says, he's moving through this crowd. Jairus is just desperate, and Jesus says, "Who touched my clothes?" He just kind of stops everything. And again, that's strange because we know that Jesus knows everything. So my understanding of this is that he does this for the woman's sake, not for his own. He knows what's happened. He knows that power has gone out from him. So why would he draw attention to this poor woman who's hoping to just touch his clothes? She's probably really glad because she knows she's been healed, and she's probably just wanting to melt away.
Yeah.
And just go away healed. But that's not enough for Jesus.
No.
He doesn't want to just be a power source. He wants her to have more than that. And that really strikes me. What do you think he wants her to have?
Well, he wants her to have a relationship, but not not just with him, interestingly, I guess with all the other people.
Yeah.
So if she's infamous for being unclean,
Yes.
now suddenly everybody knows
Yeah.
she's now
Absolutely.
acceptable in community again.
So she's been publicly shamed, and it's almost like he's now publicly unshaming her. And I think Patrick was talking about it on Sunday in the sermon, but I think shame's a really interesting thing that we probably don't think about enough in our culture. We think about guilt being forgiven. We don't think about shame being cleansed. Shame goes very deep. It kind of people who are ashamed feel like there's a stain that goes very deep. They want to be covered. They want to hide. And that's slightly different from the concept of guilt. So I think it's something we probably need to think about more.
Because even when her source of shame is taken away, she still just wants to disappear.
She still wants to continue to live in a kind of shame makes people want to hide.
Yeah.
And there's lots of reasons that we are in our church family. People are ashamed, and in our culture around us. So I think it's a really important thing for us to think about more. And I think another just really interesting little note at the end of verse 34, this is something that Steve Midgley brought out in his talk, is she came, fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. So that must have taken some time. He wanted her to tell him her story. And again, we're often in a big rush, aren't we? And Jesus is not being pushed around. He's not in a rush. He's got time to slow down and listen to this woman's story. I think that's really significant, particularly when it must have been a story. I mean, it can't have been a very quick story if it had been 12 years of suffering and ending in poverty. So I just think that's a really lovely little detail we can just kind of skip over. And Jesus wants her to meet with him. He wants her to encounter him as a person. He doesn't just want the problem to go away. He wants way more than that. And I think that's relevant for us as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I often just want Jesus to sort out my car problem or my work or something like that. And he wants more. He wants to meet with me. He wants relationship, like you said. And that is what the woman will be rejoicing about now in heaven. When we see her, I think again, these are two real people. We will meet these women in heaven.
That's nice to remember.
It's not just a story. They are real people. And that's why I really love this little thing. I think she comes to Jesus with a very superstitious faith, this woman, and she leaves him with knowing, having met with him, and as you said, he calls her daughter. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. What wonderful words for her and everyone else to hear.
And actually, the way Jesus speaks to her, we'll see for a number of women as well.
Yes,
throughout the gospel.
Yes, exactly. So I do think there are applications in this in terms of the way we reach out to people here. Do people feel welcome at Knighton who have lived lives who are full of shame? Usually people hide shame and they'll put on a veneer of kind of respectability. But are we a church where people feel welcomed? And I think that's really important.
Because specifically, the people she's isolated from are the religious.
Yeah, they are the religious people. They would have known the rules, and they would have been like, "Oh, get away! Don't touch us."
She's not acceptable to come and worship here. She can't come into our building.
Absolutely, no. So I think that's a challenge for us as Christians, both personally, because many of us have a lot of shame. Are we actually meeting with Jesus and working that through, and knowing His forgiveness? It takes a long time for shame to be covered and for the gospel to really impact it. It's not a quick thing, but also are we welcoming to people from the outside who might think, oh, I can't go in there.
You feel like an outcast.
They're all good. Yeah. So I think that is quite challenging.
And the church building can be a difficult place to walk into.
Yeah. I mean, I remember this was years ago, obviously. A friend of mine who wasn't a Christian, she came to church. She was a nipper's mum, and she went away again because she felt she was too scruffily dressed. She saw lots of people really tidy and thought, I can't go in there. And I was just like, that's really terrible.
Yeah.
I think that would be much less likely now.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't be the case, should it really? So Yeah, I was just looking to see. Yeah, one of the things that Steve said in his talk is the bleeding woman, she receives a torrent of grace, which I thought was a really lovely phrase. She's not just kind of healed, but she is brought into relationship. She's called daughter. She's given peace, shalom, which is the kind of whole kind of healing, that torrent of grace. Jesus never, he covers shame, he forgives guilt, he draws people towards him in a really lovely way, instead of probably what she was encountering, disgust and anger from other people, because she shouldn't have been there. So yeah, she's been very solitary, very isolated. So that's a wonderful miracle. But then moving on to Jairus, it's really interesting focusing in on this miracle. Jesus hasn't raised anyone from the dead yet, has he? Mark? No. Thank you.
So, again, interestingly, you said at verse 30, why is Jesus asking the question? He knows.
Yeah.
He knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
He also knows that the daughter's going to die.
Yes.
So is there, I mean, there must be a reason then. This isn't an accident. This isn't Jesus going, oh, sugar, I've spent too long.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, whoops, got that one wrong. Like we might miscalculated that one. No, I love the way Jesus moves through, kind of, he's not rushed and hassled like I often am. No one else sets his agenda for him. It reminds me a little bit of the miracle of healing, of bringing Lazarus back to life. He deliberately waits in John 11, I think. He deliberately waits until Lazarus has died, so that he can demonstrate his power to heal. I mean, this is amazing. Just because I did this as a Sunday school, I learned this in Sunday school. You kind of lose the extraordinary miracle, the power of it, to raise a little girl who's dead back to life again. I mean, that's...
And just to go back, though, to the similarity with Lazarus, it's not cold and calculated, I'm going to wait 3 days, I'm going to do this. Because you see at that miracle that Jesus is still massively emotionally involved in that situation.
At the horror and the violence and the destruction of death, and the evil one who lies behind death. So it's not I'm going to teach them a lesson here.
Yeah.
He does it because it's for their good. So yeah, I love this. The little girl's not dead but asleep. So to him, death is just like like you just waking up your little girl. You go upstairs and you just kind of go, time to wake up. It's kind of like that is all death is to him. It's just he can wake someone up with a shake, which is lovely. I also love the detail of he told them to give us something to eat.
Yeah, I just circled that. Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
I think that's really, again, it's just very real. Yeah. It's very human. It's very normal. It's not kind of, oh wow, there's been this kind of amazing miracle. That's it's just very down to earth in a very kind of human way. The girl stands up immediately. She's not sort of convalescing for a couple of weeks. It's a complete and immediate healing, a little bit like Peter's mother-in-law back in earlier on in Mark. And the people are astonished. And then surprisingly here, he doesn't want this miracle spread around.
Yeah.
So yeah. Jesus always slightly does the unexpected thing. You can't put him in a box and go, oh, this is what he's like. He takes us by surprise.
Can we just pick out verse 36?
Yeah.
So the guys come and they say, don't bother the teacher, your daughter is dead. Jesus overhears and says, don't be afraid, just believe. So there's obviously this fear there, isn't there? And is there a link there between fear and unbelief? Is that so the opposite of faith being fear almost?
Yes. Yeah, I guess fear because they don't understand who Jesus is. I mean, people so far through Mark haven't really understood, apart from the demons and God. People don't know who he is, and because they don't know who he is, they're frightened by the suffering and difficulty that they go through. Yes, I think there is. And then they're astonished at what they see. I feel for them. I mean, I think it must have been really difficult for them, not quite understanding what was going on.
Oh, it's a roller coaster, isn't it?
Complete roller coaster. And the poor disciples, they've seen a storm being calmed, and then this little girl being raised from the dead, and the demon possessed man. I mean, it just must have been, a complete roller coaster walking around with Jesus. So yeah. I think that is a challenge to Jairus. Jesus is always he's looking for faith, isn't he? He's looking for people to believe him, take him at his word, trust him. And again, that's a challenge for us, because I often don't do that. I'm often afraid of things and think, what's going to happen? Jesus has gone away. He's not going to, he doesn't know about this. So yeah, that is a challenge. Must have been quite noisy as well. I mean, there's quite a lot of action here with a crowd pressing around him. I mean, we haven't seen much of that for the last couple of years, have we?
And then
crowds
the crying
of people,
and the wailing.
and then the crying and the wailing, which would have been really loud. There's quite a lot of noise and action.
And the laughter.
Yeah, and the laughing. It's certainly not boring, Mark's Gospel.
No, it's not at all. Or just being with Jesus.
Yeah, or being with Jesus. Yeah. Anything else strike you?
I think the idea of we're going to talk about this again, but Jesus constantly tells people not to tell anyone what he's done or tell anyone about him. There's a secret, isn't there, that's sort of been going on through Mark's Gospel. I do find that quite fascinating. I do think the bleeding woman story helps us a little bit. Is that some people will be coming to Jesus just for his miracles. Just for his power.
Yes.
Just to see him raise the dead.
Which presumably is what she was doing, and he didn't let her get away with it.
Yeah, and Jesus was saying, I'm going to keep this a secret because I want people to follow me for a different reason. Not just because I can raise the dead, but actually, ultimately, he wants them to keep following him through weakness and through suffering, which is more important than through the power.
And because having a personal encounter with Jesus and having a relationship with him is the most important thing in the world. So again, I guess, in our church family, when we're meeting with people, when we're trying to help friends, and we do need to be practical and help people, and but I think always remembering that actually it's meeting with Jesus. Jesus is in the room with us, and what we all need is to be meeting with him, to have that relationship with him. We don't just need our lives kind of plasters on our difficulties. We actually need a relationship with Jesus. But I mean, I don't mean that we just go, I'll pray for you and walk away. But
yes,
because
there's the time aspect as well, isn't there? And I think we say okay, having a relationship with Jesus is the most important thing in the world. But actually, these stories show us that that's not inaccessible.
No, absolutely.
That Jesus actually is more than willing to have that relationship. It's very easy.
He seeks it out, yes. I mean, he is not happy with the woman sliding away and not meeting with him. He wants all of us to meet with him, and nobody is beyond that. Even a woman who is unclean and desperate and poor and isolated and full of shame, he wants her. He wants a relationship with her.
He wants to hear all of that.
Yeah.
Because that's all she does. She falls at his feet and she just tells him everything. Tells him how she's been feeling, how she's been treated.
The whole truth. Yeah.
And even knowing that and knowing more, Jesus still loves her. Even seeing the very depths of her shame.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that is really striking.
Anything else to add?
I don't think so. No, just encourage people to just keep looking at the story and thinking about it, and just giving thanks that we have such a wonderful Saviour. He's not how we would necessarily expect, but it's just really amazing to see more what he's like, how he treats people, what his priorities are. It's just extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah. Who he is. So thanks, Josh.
No, thank you. That's great. Shall we pray?
Yeah.
Father, thank you for Jesus. Thank you that he's not how we expect. He's not the kind of Savior, this kind of Messiah figure that we would plan for, but actually he's better in every way, that he will stop and speak to us and have a relationship with us. Thank you that you're not just a genie in a bottle that we just turn to when we need help, but actually you're our Father who calls us your precious child, like we see in these stories. These two daughters that are beloved by you. Thank you that you love us in that very same way, and that you want to know us and you want to be there with us. Father, thank you that you heal us of all our shame, all our guilt, and all our isolation. And I pray that we help point others to you, and that we help others feel welcome in the same way that you've welcomed us. Amen.
Amen.